Imagine this. You're born into the world. Your first cries echo in a small Spartan home, and instead of your mother holding you close, strangers lift you up and examine you like a piece of cattle. Too weak? Too small? Not quite perfect? Then you don't get a life. You get abandoned on a cold mountainside. Welcome to Sparta, where survival wasn't a right, it was a privilege, and every stage of life felt like a slow-motion death sentence. Today, we're diving into why Spartan life was worse than death itself. 1. Birth was a test, not a celebration. In most places, a baby's first day is full of love. In Sparta, it was Judgment Day. Newborns were inspected by the Council of Elders, who decided whether you were fit to live. If you looked weak, malformed, or even just a little too fragile, you weren't sent home. You were left on Mount Tagetus to die of cold, hunger, or to be picked apart by wild animals. Imagine your entire existence hinging on whether a group of men thought you had warrior potential. No compassion, no second chances. Just a brutal lottery at birth. And if you did survive this first trial, well, congratulations. You've just won a ticket to a childhood that made nightmares look soft. 2. Childhood wasn't innocence. It was boot camp. At age 7, Spartan boys were yanked from their families and thrown into the agoge, a state-run military training program. Childhood ended overnight. Picture a child barely tall enough to lift a spear, suddenly living in barracks, stripped of comfort, love, and safety. One cloak for the year, regardless of season. Shoes? Forget it. Beds? Just piles of reeds you ripped out of the riverbank yourself. The agoge didn't just raise warriors. It erased the idea of childhood entirely. And if you thought harsh discipline was bad, wait until you see what they called mealtime. 3. Starvation was a teaching tool. The agoge kept boys on rations so tiny they were never full. Hunger wasn't an accident. It was policy. They were encouraged to steal food to survive. But here's the catch. If you were caught, the punishment wasn't for the theft. It was for failing. One boy famously stole a fox and hid it under his cloak. When the animal began ripping into his stomach, he stayed silent rather than admit he'd stolen. He died on the spot, torn apart by the fox, but he died with honor. That was Sparta's logic. Pain, starvation, even death were all just part of the training, and hunger was just one form of torture. Violence was another, and it was everywhere. 4. Violence wasn't a lesson, it was a lifestyle. Spartan boys weren't just trained to fight, they were forced to. Organized battles called diamastagosis weren't playful skirmishes. They were bloody contests where children whipped and beat each other until skin split and bones cracked. Imagine being 10 years old and fighting your peers in public, while adults cheered on from the sidelines. Pain wasn't avoided, it was celebrated. Bruises and scars were badges of honor, and those who refused to fight? They were labeled cowards, mocked, and punished even harder. And if childhood was brutal, adolescence turned into outright murder school. 5. Teenagers became assassins. At 18, young Spartans could be recruited into the krypteia, a secret state-sponsored death squad. Their mission? Terrorize the Helots, the enslaved population that outnumbered Spartans 7-1. These teenagers were sent out at night with daggers, tasked with murdering Helots to keep them afraid and submissive. Imagine being a 17-year-old, sneaking through the dark countryside, stabbing farmers in their sleep, all under government orders. This wasn't war, it was systematic terror, designed to harden the killers and remind the enslaved of their place. But don't think Spartan women got it easy. Their lives were shaped by brutality too. 6. Spartan girls weren't spared. Spartan women had unusual freedoms for the time. They could own land and weren't confined to the home, but make no mistake, their lives weren't easy. Girls were forced into physical training from a young age. Running, wrestling, throwing javelins, all under the belief that strong mothers produced strong sons. Marriage wasn't a choice either. Some weddings involved ritual kidnappings, where a girl's head was shaved and she was dressed as a boy before being delivered to her husband. Romance? Love? Forget it. Her role was to bear warriors, nothing more. And for the men, adulthood didn't bring freedom. It only meant a lifetime of service to the state. You were 7. Men didn't own their lives. A Spartan man wasn't his own. After the agoge, he belonged to the military for life. He didn't live with his family. He lived in barracks, ate in the communal mess halls, and answered to the state before his wife or children. Every meal was black broth, a disgusting stew of pig's blood and vinegar that even visiting Greeks described as inedible. Disobedience or dishonor wasn't just shameful. It was exile, and in Sparta, exile was worse than execution. It stripped you of honor, rights, and identity. You weren't just cast out, you were erased. And when it came to battle, there was only one acceptable outcome: death with honor. 8. Death was expected. Survival was shame. For Spartans, returning home alive from a lost battle was the ultimate disgrace. Come back with your shield, or on it, wasn't just a saying. It was law. A man who fled was marked forever as a coward. He was denied honors, ridiculed in the streets, and even young women mocked him in public. Survival wasn't survival. It was a living humiliation that clung to you until your final breath. For a Spartan, death was cleaner, easier, and far more honorable than the shame of life after failure. And for the few who lived long enough, old age brought no peace either. 9. Old age wasn't respected. It was pitiful few Spartans made it to old age. But those who did often lived as shadows, too weak to fight, too frail to lead. They became relics in a society that only valued strength. In a culture where usefulness meant combat, old age was a slow, humiliating decay. No medals, no soft retirement, just irrelevance. While the younger warriors prepared for the glory of dying young. And this leads to the final, haunting truth about Sparta itself. 10. Life in Sparta was a death sentence in disguise. Every step of Spartan life was designed for suffering. From the cradle to the grave, you weren't a person. You were a weapon. And when you were no longer sharp enough to cut, you were cast aside. Other Greek cities celebrated art, philosophy, or love. Sparta celebrated endurance, obedience, and death. And that's the cruel irony. In Sparta, dying wasn't the tragedy. Living was. So, was Spartan life worse than death? Absolutely. Because death is final. Spartan life was a relentless, grinding punishment where every stage broke you down until you had nothing left but scars and obedience. If you want more brutal truths about history's darkest corners, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with a friend. Trust me, there's plenty more where this came from.